There are stars who shine because Hollywood chooses them, and there are stars who shine because they cannot help it. Rita Hayworth was both. To the world, she was the love goddess, a living vision of glamour, desire, and impossible beauty. But behind the iconic smile, behind the flame-red hair and the magnetic presence that defined an entire era, lived a woman who spent her life fighting to be seen, heard, and understood. Born in 1918 as Margarita Carmen Cansino, she grew up far from the glittering lights that would one day worship her. Her childhood was shaped not by innocence, but by discipline, rigid flamenco lessons from a demanding father, endless rehearsals, and performances in Mexico long before she could grasp what fame even meant. By the time Hollywood found her, she was already exhausted, and yet the industry demanded even more. To fit its standards, studios reshaped her, literally. Painful electrolysis procedures lifted her hairline, her dark hair was dyed to a fiery red, and even her name was rewritten. The world would soon fall in love with Rita Hayworth, but the woman inside never fully recognized the reflection staring back. Her rise was meteoric, her allure unmatched. From Gilda to global wartime pinup fame, she became a symbol of fantasy for millions. Yet privately, she remained shy, vulnerable, and haunted by loneliness. Her love life, 5 marriages, including royalty, brought passion, betrayal, and heartbreak in equal measure. And in her later years, when early Alzheimer's began to steal her memory, the world mistook her decline for instability, never realizing the truth until it was too late. This is not just the story of a Hollywood icon. It is the story of a woman shaped by fame, consumed by reinvention, and finally reclaimed by the legacy she never meant to leave behind. Before she became Rita Hayworth, the woman who would redefine Hollywood's idea of desire, she was simply Margarita Carmen Cansino, a quiet little girl who learned far too early that the world expected her to perform. Her story did not begin on a studio lot or under the glow of marquee lights. It began in a modest home shaped by rhythm, discipline, and a father who believed that greatness could be forced into existence if the pressure was unrelenting enough. Her father, Eduardo Cansino, was a Spanish flamenco dancer whose entire life revolved around perfection. Her mother, Rita Hayworth, was an American dancer who carried herself with gentleness. Between these two extremes, strict discipline and quiet tenderness, young Margarita found herself pulled, molded, and pushed in ways she could never resist. At just 3 years old, long before most children learn to read, she was taught to master complex flamenco steps, her tiny feet echoing the demands of her father's expectations. Every day was a rehearsal. Every night was preparation for another performance. Childhood games, carefree afternoons, and simple freedoms were luxuries she would never know. By the time she reached her teenage years, she was already performing professionally in Mexico, not out of ambition, but out of obligation. The money she earned helped support the family, and while audiences saw talent, discipline, and beauty, Margarita felt the weight of responsibility far beyond her age. Her father controlled every aspect of her early life: the rehearsals, the bookings, the travel, even the way she behaved in public. He believed he was preparing her for greatness, but in reality, he was silently shaping a woman who would one day struggle to claim ownership of her own identity. It was during these years, standing under harsh stage lights and crowded Mexican nightclubs, that her shyness became her secret refuge. On stage, she was bold and fierce as the music demanded. Off stage, she vanished into herself. When Hollywood finally noticed her, it wasn't the promising young girl they saw. It was the exotic dancer, the Latina beauty who didn't quite fit the mold of their leading ladies. Executives saw potential, but also a problem. Margarita Cansino looked too ethnic for the roles they wanted to give her, And so began the second, even more painful transformation of her life. The studio system of the 1930s was a machine, a powerful, unyielding force that held absolute control over those who wished to succeed. For Margarita, this meant surrendering the last pieces of the identity she had left. The changes were drastic and, most of all, physical. Her naturally low hairline, a characteristic of her Spanish heritage, was lifted through electrolysis. Week after week, needle after needle, the procedure burned away the past in order to create a future the studio could market. Her dark hair was lightened, then dyed to the fiery red that would one day become legendary. Even her name was no longer hers. The studio insisted on a new identity, Rita Hayworth. With each alteration, something inside her grew more distant, more fragmented. The girl who had once moved to the rhythm of flamenco was disappearing, replaced by a version of herself designed for the screen. And yet, despite the pain, the sacrifice, and the loss of everything familiar, Rita stepped into the new identity the world demanded. Hollywood now had its newest star in the making. But the woman behind the transformation was already beginning to lose herself. By the early 1940s, the transformation was complete. Margarita Cansino had vanished behind the luminous mask of Rita Hayworth, Hollywood's newest promise, a woman sculpted by the industry to embody desire itself. But no one, not even the studios that engineered her image, could have predicted what would happen next. Rita didn't just fit into Hollywood, she set it on fire. Her rise was not sudden, but steady, built from supporting roles, dance numbers, and the glowing aura she carried even when the camera wasn't looking. There was something magnetic about her, something that drew audiences in before she spoke a single line. When Rita moved, people watched. When she smiled, theaters brightened. And when she danced, Hollywood finally understood that it had been waiting for her all along. Then came Gilda in 1946, the role that would immortalize her. Her entrance in the film, throwing her head back as her red hair spilled like molten fire and whispering, "Me?" became one of the most unforgettable moments in cinema history. Rita wasn't just acting, she was embodying a fantasy the world didn't know it had. In that black satin dress, singing "Put the Blame on Mame," she became the ultimate symbol of seduction and independence. Overnight, Rita Hayworth became the Love Goddess, a title that would follow her for the rest of her life, whether she wanted it or not. Her poster from Gilda became one of the most famous pinups of the century. Soldiers during World War II taped her image inside lockers, on airplane panels, inside tents, even onto bombs dropped over Europe and the Pacific. She was the face of longing, the reminder of home, the dream soldiers clung to in their darkest nights. In a strange way, Rita Hayworth fought in the war too, not with weapons, but with hope. Yet the strange irony of Rita's fame was this. The more powerful her image became, the smaller she felt inside. Because off-screen, she was nothing like Gilda. She was shy, deeply shy. Directors noted that she barely raised her voice, avoided crowds, and apologized too often. Her confidence existed only when a camera gave her permission to become someone else. Away from the lights, she slipped back into the softness of Margarita, a woman who never sought attention and often wished the world would stop looking at her. But Hollywood wasn't interested in Margarita. Hollywood needed Gilda. Studios monitored her diet, her schedule, her interviews, every breath of her public life. Her days began at dawn and ended long after midnight, filled with rehearsals, photo shoots, and endless demands. The studio machine controlled her as much as her father once did, dictating how she should walk, speak, laugh, and love. The power she projected on screen was a carefully constructed illusion. Behind the scenes, she lived with the constant fear of disappointing the system that had built her. Still, her brilliance was undeniable. Films like CoverGirl, You Were Never Lovelier, and My Gal Sal cemented her place among the greatest stars of Hollywood's golden age. Rita Hayworth wasn't just famous, she became the definition of glamour. Yet, as her star burned brighter, a quiet truth lingered beneath the surface. The world adored Rita Hayworth, but few people ever truly knew the woman who played her. And soon, that longing for genuine love, for someone to love the woman behind the legend, would lead Rita into a chapter filled with passion, disillusionment, and heartbreak. If Hollywood created the goddess, it was love that shaped the woman, and love that wounded her the deepest. Rita Hayworth's relationships were legendary, glamorous, and dramatic, but beneath the headlines and wedding photographs was a truth she carried throughout her life. Men fell in love with Gilda, but almost none of them truly loved Rita. Her first marriage to Edward Judson was less a romance than a business arrangement disguised as affection. He helped her enter Hollywood, yes, but at a cost. Judson managed her career with a firm hand, using her beauty and growing fame as leverage. He negotiated contracts, controlled her money, and made decisions without her input. Rita was young, vulnerable, and still learning to speak up in an industry that hardly allowed women to speak at all. When she finally found the courage to leave him, she was walking away not just from a man, but from the last thread connecting her to the version of herself Hollywood had manufactured. Then came Orson Welles, the brilliant, unpredictable auteur whose charisma was as overwhelming as his genius. With Welles, Rita felt something she had longed for all her life, to be seen for more than her image. Their marriage was full of passion, laughter, and creative electricity, but also chaos. Welles' ambition pulled him in every direction. His unpredictable habits and long absences left Rita feeling abandoned. He adored her, but he lived in a world larger than any marriage could contain. Years later, Welles wrote that he had failed her, admitting in his letters that he never gave her the stability she craved. Their love was real, but real was not enough to survive. Her third marriage changed history. Rita Hayworth became the first Hollywood star to marry into royalty when she wed Prince Ali Khan, one of the most glamorous men of his time. Their union fascinated the world, an American screen goddess joining a royal dynasty. But marriage to a prince did not bring a fairy tale ending. The pressures of royal expectations, cultural differences, and public scrutiny strained their relationship. When it ended, Rita fought fiercely for custody of their daughter, Yasmin Khan, proving that behind the glamorous icon was a mother willing to challenge even royalty. Then came Dick Haymes, a chapter defined by exhaustion and sacrifice. Haymes was drowning in debt, lawsuits, and immigration troubles. Rita, already fragile, already tired, used her fame and earnings to protect him, taking roles simply to pay off his obligations. But instead of gratitude, she received more turmoil. His legal problems dragged her deeper into public scandal, feeding tabloids that painted her not as a victim, but as a woman losing control. It was a painful reminder that vulnerability and fame rarely coexist without cost. Her final marriage, to producer James Hill, began with hope and ended with heartbreak. Hill, like the others, fell in love with the myth, then struggled to understand the shy, gentle woman behind it. The pressures of Hollywood, the fractures inside Rita, and the relentless nature of fame made their union yet another painful ending. Through all of this, Rita held one quiet truth close to her heart, a truth she expressed in one of her most famous lines. "Men go to bed with Gilda, but they wake up with me." It wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. The world adored the illusion, but Rita Hayworth spent her life yearning for someone who would love the woman behind the legend. And as heartbreak accumulated, another struggle, silent, invisible and far more devastating, began to enter her life without warning. Fame had shaped Rita Hayworth, sculpted her, elevated her, yet fame was never gentle with her. As she entered her 40s and 50s, the world expected the love goddess to remain untouched by time. But Rita, the woman behind the legend, was tired of reinvention, tired of heartbreak, tired of carrying an image that grew heavier as the years passed. Slowly, quietly, a different kind of storm began to gather around her. Her career, once unstoppable, started to slow. The Hollywood she helped define was changing, and younger stars filled the screens she once dominated. But the decline wasn't just professional, it was emotional. Years of pressure, public scrutiny, and personal loss left her drained. She longed for peace, for normalcy, for a kind of life she had never been allowed to live. The girl who was never allowed a childhood had also never been allowed rest. But something else, something far more dangerous, was happening beneath the surface. Rita began to forget things. Small things at first. Lines in scripts, appointments, the names of people she'd worked with for years. Friends whispered about her becoming erratic. Directors whispered about her being unreliable. The tabloids sharpened their knives. They wrote that Rita Hayworth was unstable, emotional, difficult. They blamed alcohol. They blamed stress. They blamed age. No one suspected the truth. No one understood that what was happening inside her was not a failing, but a disease. By the time the 1960s arrived, Rita's symptoms had grown harder to hide. She struggled during interviews. She became disoriented in public. At times, she didn't recognize familiar faces. Instead of compassion, she received criticism. She was judged, mocked, dismissed as another fading star who couldn't let go of fame. It was cruel, and it was wrong. For almost an entire decade, Rita Hayworth lived under the weight of the world's misunderstanding. Hollywood saw a fallen icon. The public saw a woman losing control. But what no one saw, what no one even looked for, was the early onset of Alzheimer's disease, decades before it was widely understood. The misdiagnosis broke her spirit. Rita withdrew from the public eye, not because she wanted to disappear, but because she didn't know how to explain what she didn't yet understand. Her shyness, once merely a quiet part of her personality, became her refuge. She retreated from events, refused interviews, and avoided the industry that had once claimed her as its queen. And yet, even as her world shrank, the legend of Rita Hayworth continued to shine. Films like Gilda, CoverGirl, and You Were Never Lovelier played on television screens across the country, reminding audiences of the woman who had once been the brightest light on the screen. But Rita could no longer connect the woman in those films with herself. There is a heartbreaking story told by those who loved her. One day, Rita was watching Gilda when she turned to the person beside her and asked, "Who is that beautiful woman?" She didn't remember filming it. She didn't remember the fame, the applause, the power. Alzheimer's had taken those memories from her, piece by piece. To the world, Rita Hayworth was still an icon. But to herself, she was becoming a stranger. Her illness continued to progress, unnoticed by most, misunderstood by many. And it would not be until much later, when her daughter stepped forward with the truth, that the world finally realized. Rita Hayworth had not fallen from grace. She had been fighting a battle no one saw. As the 1970s unfolded, Rita Hayworth's world grew smaller, softer, and increasingly distant. The woman who once commanded stages, screens, and imaginations now found herself navigating days that slipped through her fingers like sand. But in the midst of that quiet unraveling, something extraordinary emerged: love, in its purest and most unwavering form. Her daughter, Yasmin Khan, became her anchor. Yasmin had inherited her mother's gentleness, her empathy, and her strength. When Rita's symptoms grew too heavy to hide, Yasmin stepped forward, shielding her from the public eye, from the tabloids that still try to rewrite her life, and from the harshness of a world that rarely grants grace to fading stars. Yasmin became more than a caretaker. She became the witness to her mother's final journey. Those who visited Rita in those years described her as serene. She no longer carried the tension of expectation. No studio executives telling her how to dress, no photographers waiting for the perfect pose, no directors demanding retakes. For the first time since childhood, Rita was allowed to simply exist, though the cost of that peace was the very memory of who she had once been. There were moments of clarity, brief flashes when her eyes brightened with recognition, or when a melody from an old film stirred something familiar in her. But they were fleeting, quickly swallowed by the fog that Alzheimer's cast over her mind. She forgot the roles that made her famous. She forgot the marriages that had shaped her. She even forgot the battles she had fought. But she never forgot Yasmin. Somehow, the bond between mother and daughter held firm, even as the rest of her world dissolved. As Rita's condition became more visible, the world finally learned the truth. Yasmin spoke publicly about her mother's illness, revealing what had long been misunderstood. Those tabloid headlines from years before, calling Rita unstable, difficult, alcoholic, were exposed for what they were: cruel misinterpretations of a woman fighting an invisible disease. In speaking out, Yasmin didn't just protect her mother. She changed how the world understood Alzheimer's. Rita Hayworth, even in her silence, became one of the most influential faces of the disease, inspiring research, funding, and awareness that continues to this day. Her struggle became a catalyst for compassion. By the mid-1980s, Rita was living in quiet dignity. The fiery red hair that once symbolized Hollywood glamour had long since faded. But even then, in her softest moments, there was still a glimmer of the woman the world had adored. The gentle lift of her chin, the elegance in her posture, the warmth in her smile. She had always been more than Gilda, more than the love goddess, more than the icon Hollywood created. She was a survivor. Rita Hayworth passed away in 1987, leaving behind a legacy far deeper than the glamour she had been known for. The world mourned not just a star, but a woman whose life reflected the entire arc of Hollywood's golden age: its beauty, its cruelty, its illusion, and its relentless pursuit of perfection. In the years that followed, tributes poured in from filmmakers, actors, historians, and fans who now saw her with new eyes. Time, memory, illness, none of it could erase who Rita Hayworth truly was. Because legends are not made of flawless lives. They are made of human ones. And Rita Hayworth's humanity, once obscured by the brightness of her own myth, now stands as the brightest part of her story. In the end, Rita Hayworth's story is not simply the rise and fall of a Hollywood star. It is the journey of a woman who lived between two worlds, one created for her and one she quietly carried within. On screen, she was the embodiment of desire, mystery, and glamour. Off-screen, she was gentle, shy, and constantly searching for the freedom she had been denied since childhood. Few stars have ever shone as brightly as Rita. Fewer still have carried such a heavy price for that light. Her life reminds us that fame is rarely what it appears to be. It can elevate, but it can also imprison. It can give a name to the world while stealing the one you were born with. Rita Hayworth understood this better than anyone. The world fell in love with her image, but the woman inside remained hidden, sometimes by necessity, sometimes by pain, and eventually by the fog of an illness she never deserved. Yet even in her most fragile moments, Rita's legacy continued to grow. Through her daughter Yasmin, her story became a force for awareness and compassion, transforming misunderstanding into action. Her struggle opened conversations about Alzheimer's long before the world fully understood the disease. And today, millions recognize Rita Hayworth not just as a cinematic icon, but as a symbol of resilience, vulnerability, and grace. Her films remain timeless. Her image remains unforgettable. But perhaps her greatest gift is the reminder that legends are human, that behind every dazzling frame is a heart, a past, and a longing to be seen. Rita Hayworth may have forgotten her own legacy, but the world never has and never will.